Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Southern Outdoorsmen Podcast. Got a fun one today. We got some buddies in the studio, some frequent guests who we've been wanting to have on basically since we did the MSU study, because I know y'all are going to have a lot to say about it. But we're going to be talking a lot about locating bucks on their natural patterns this week, specifically late summer going into season. How do you find that buck? How do you stay with him as he shifts, as the velvet comes off, testosterone goes up, and a lot of people kind of lose bucks in that time frame. So we're going to cover that. We're going to talk about a lot of rabbit holes. So we got Michael Pike and Shane Parker here. Michael, what's up?
Nothing much.
Doing good?
Doing good.
Old Dilla.
Old Dilla in the house.
Yes, sir. Shane, how are you doing?
Doing well. How are y'all?
Doing pretty good. Nice hat. Looks
It
good.
is a great looking
That's
hat.
a great looking hat.
Man.
God, I could have picked me up one of those.
Yeah, man. Where'd you get that hat?
I don't know, but at the
Somebody
show,
hooked me up with it.
the girls were like, "Oh yeah, that's my favorite hat right there. That one right there."
Hey,
Girls?
that's
What are
true.
you
All the wives
women?
and girlfriends
What?
that came by, where the guys would be like, I don't care which one do you think, babe, and that one every time.
Every single time.
The ladies love the old school camo hat,
Yep.
so you need to go get one. Jacob, how you doing?
Pretty good. Whatever. You were talking about we're going to go down rabbit holes, and that was a quick one right there out the rip.
Oh,
About
yeah.
a minute and 10 seconds into it. No, I'm doing well. Super excited for this episode. So this is something, Shane, I was telling you, we had dinner upstairs before we came down here for the recording, and we get questions probably at least once or twice a week from a lot of times it's new listeners that are trying to figure out how to go about locating bucks in summertime, especially on properties where they can't run bait or any kind of minerals. Of course, if you have some private land you can do that on, that's a great way just to get some kind of inventory. But again, you've been doing this for a long time. We actually, was it 3 years ago we did our trail camera study series with you? I think.
I think so. Yeah.
It was Andrew's first year in his house he lives in now.
Yeah.
So that was the first time we had you on, I believe, right? It was that whole episode series.
Yeah.
And we talked a lot about kind of what you'd learned just running a ton of trail cameras and looking at data points. But the summertime, like this time, kind of getting the late summer, early fall, is when a lot of guys are thinking about putting cameras out and trying to figure out exactly what they need to do in order to locate deer. And Pike, we did this a couple years ago, and you found a giant deer that ended up, one of our listeners and now buddy killed that deer, the Wizard. And it's something that I've always found kind of challenging. Again, I'm a guy, I don't run a lot of trail cameras. Andrew makes fun of me all the time because typically he's the one putting cameras out. But Shane, I know we're going to talk about strategies of what you're doing this year after learning how bucks have shifted last year after the velvet had come off and actually pre-setting up cameras for that shift. But let's talk a little bit about what you did last year, moving into a new area. You decided to start hunting some different pieces of public, and you were very gung-ho trying to figure out what was actually out there. So can you maybe walk us through, I guess from a 30,000-foot view, what are some of the most important factors you're looking at from a boots-on-the-ground standpoint, but also finding the perfect camera locations in order to try to get some inventory late summer, early fall?
Yeah. I mean, like last year, I kind of struggled to begin with of getting on in this new area of finding deer. I think I was going in the right places, but I just wasn't exactly familiar enough. But once everything kind of clicked with me, it was the same locations. It was modifying where I was putting them based on the habitat more than the terrain than anything. So it was thicker areas, but it's the north facing, like anywhere there's cool, dense cover, places like that. That's the places I was looking to start with. North facing, drainages and things like that. That was where I was starting out at, and it was just kind of adjusting off of that, kind of thinking less about the terrain and more about the habitat that was around it. But I like the north-facing slopes in the summertime, north-facing drains, anywhere you have water. If you have spring-fed drainages, I'm going to start there, try to pick those out and put cameras in those areas, or see if there's even sign. Like I'm looking in the mud, the creek bottoms, the branch bottoms, and seeing if you got tracks, and just kind of going off of that. But it doesn't matter what time of year that you're running cameras or you're trying to find deer. It's finding that type of terrain that has the thick cover as well. So it's a combination of both. You can't just have just the cool canopy and then not have any cover. There's just not going to be deer there at all. They may move through it, but they're not going to be staying there, and you're not going to get enough periodic enough to start patterning them during the summer. So it's still the terrain, the cool areas, with water and food really close because they don't want to move very far, especially the larger bucks, because you got to get everything really the more compacted you can get all that within an area, the quicker you can get on like a mature buck.
So I want to go over some terminology real quick. You said north-facing slopes, north-facing drainages. What do you mean by north-facing slopes and north-facing drainages for people that don't understand what that is?
Well, I mean, they're just facing the north. Like the higher elevation will be to the south, the lower elevation will be to the north. The same thing with the drainages. The open end of the drainage is going to be to the north. The higher elevation where it goes up in elevation is going to be to the south, or, southwest, southeast, however. It didn't matter, they don't have to be directly. I think there's a lot of people that think it's got to be facing just north, And you hardly ever get any drainage that's just running north-south. So anything that kind of tucks itself back into that south end where the elevation is to the south or southwest or southeast, and you can get water in that drainage and thick cover around, those are the places I'm going to pick out first. And especially that canopy cover. Like if it's open hardwoods, probably not going to be in it. Unless it's super thick, like high thick. I don't know what you probably know the term for whatever they call the canopy thickness, but an open hardwood canopy is not gonna work as well as one that's like really closed off and really just shuts that light down.
At what height are you talking about with this canopy? Are you talking about a canopy that's 7 feet off the ground, or does it matter if the canopy's 50 feet off the ground?
I mean, I'm talking mostly mature. So the mature it's going to have a mature canopy, and then it's also going to have that ground layer canopy as well. Like you may not have much understory, but you're going to have a ground layer canopy, maybe an open air, like mid-story, and then the upper story canopy is going to be, pretty closed off.
I got you. So essentially a mature forest, big trees, 50 to 80 feet tall, whatever they are. And then underneath that canopy, you've got saplings, shrubs, whatever that are maybe 10, 15 feet high. And that's like that understory ground cover.
Yeah, they call it the shrub layer. It's basically everything that's like 8 feet and down. That's going to be a super high stem count. Like we found some this past week that just were covered up with deer, and it was exactly that. It had a real thick canopy overhead. Understory underneath that canopy was really, really open, so you had a lot of airflow, a lot of wind flow in that area. And then the ground story, the shrub layer, 8 foot, was super thick. Like you couldn't walk through, you couldn't see 8-10 feet in front of you, and it was just covered with deer. And that's just something when you find areas like that, that's where you're going to find the deer this time of year, because you got to think that canopy layer that's up there, especially if you're dealing with like flat ground. That upper canopy area almost serves like a buffer zone for wind flow. So they can get under there, and it's suppressing all the scent. So if anything gets in there, it's almost like it just works its way through that upper story. So you may not have any wind flow in that area, but 100 yards away, your scent may be carrying that away, because it's almost like the whole thing is like its own little climate, if that makes sense.
Interesting.
And I think that's why they use those little wood lots.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Those little areas like that,
Just to give you an example, I walked right past the deer, and it waited until I got about 10 yards away before it blew out. I had to have walked within 10 feet of it, and it never jumped up until it knew I was far enough away for it to bounce, but I never saw it.
Interesting. So, and when we're talking about the whole north-facing slopes, the multiple layers of the treetop canopies, again, that sub-canopy layer with like the shrubs, saplings, and then the mature timber canopy, it's all about low light conditions, kind of keeping a lot more of the area shaded, so it's not so much a drastic swings of temperature swings. Because again, a big aspect, Shane, kind of like what you're mentioning, is like a place, and you mentioned this, I think, in your seminar at the Mobile Hunters Expo, talking about where a buck can thermoregulate very easily and stay cool in the summertime, correct?
Yep, exactly. That's the same. It's the same thing. They got to stay cool in the summer and warm up in the winter. So they're gonna, wintertime they're gonna stay near an area. They may, if it's really, really cold, they're gonna be getting out in the sun at some point in time to thermoregulate. If it's windy, they're gonna be finding really thick areas to kind of bed up into. Same thing during the summer. Their coats are a lot thinner in the summer, so they're more affected with temperatures then. So the hotter they get, they warm up quicker. They also cool down quicker. So if they can get out of the sun real quick, and get into that cool shaded area, they're going to cool down quick. So that's the areas that I'm kind of picking out. And if you have, you can have the thickest understory or thickest canopy in the world. If it's wide open on the ground, it just doesn't hold that coolness as much. Wind can come through and push out a cool pocket of air real quick. Whereas if you've got that thick canopy on the ground, that thick understory, that wind just can't move the cool temps as much as they can in like an open forest. So
now, when you say thick canopy on the ground level, you're a taller guy. You're taller than me, Michael, and Andrew. Can you explain, like, visually, how thick are you wanting it on the ground level, kind of like where a deer's at, to kind of hold some of that cooler air, especially in areas with a little bit more moisture?
I like it over my head. Like if I can reach up and I'm just touching the top of the canopy, which will be like 9 feet canopy height, and I want to be able to if let's say I can just swing my arms out, Yeah.
I wish I could touch
We don't know
9
anything
feet.
about that.
Yeah.
Me and Michael are here like, man, let's get to maybe 8. Oh, if we get on our tiptoes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Jump up and get up there.
But yeah, if I at thickness, I don't want to be like if that light was 20 feet away, I don't want to be able to see it.
Okay.
Like it needs to be blocked. So I need a real high stem count. But it doesn't need to be so thick that they can't move through it. But I mean, we've everywhere that I've had really, really success during the summer finding big bucks is just being in that super, super thick. It's almost thicker than it is during the winter, like, way thicker than you would think. Think of the worst pine thicket you could ever think of.
Which this brings us, back like 3 or 4 years ago when I started throwing cameras out on this one particular WMA.
You almost said it, didn't you?
No, I didn't. I've been thinking about it. So, anyways, I started putting them out in more open areas because, you watch a YouTube video and they're basically like, oh, these deer are not going to be in thick areas because they're growing their antlers. They're in velvet. They don't want to mess them up.
No. That might work
No.
early.
Yeah. But, where I found all of the deer was in the thickest thickets you could possibly think of.
And that's why I was actually going to bring that up about your experience in more of that pine country area, Michael, with those SMZs. And you were finding a lot of those deer in the really, really thick, really in the pines where we wouldn't really assume that's where they'd be. I remember one of the spots where you had some of the biggest bachelor group you had.
Right.
And those pines are nasty.
Yeah.
And like in that specific area, because if I remember correctly, it was on the side of a ridge that had been cut that's all grown up in pines, but what made you want to put a camera in that specific spot versus any other trail in there? Is it just like, is a game of odds where you're just finding multiple trails to put cameras on?
Well, I cast a broad net because it's around the time that we were listening to like Josh Driver and things like that. So I was putting them in different things. So I wasn't finding them in the more open, areas where the wind was, blowing through and whatnot. This canopy was like he was saying, like, trees are 80 foot tall, something like that. You can see underneath there pretty good bit. The airflow is decent, but the deer weren't there. Where they were was in the pines, basically 15, 20 foot tall, and you had, it was just thick enough. Like they had their trails all zigzagging through there, so it's not like, I guess, they had an issue traveling through. But if you was just, one of us, even our height, walking through there, of course, we're having to duck and dodge and everything like that. But they've got enough room to where they could meander through there without any issue. But it's still thick, a lot thicker than you would think.
Yeah, and see, that's, I guess, an interesting thing because if you kind of go back, it's been a while since I listened to that Josh Driver episode. And, it seemed like a lot of times they were on the edge of some of that cover, but they were still in slightly more open areas, it seemed like, where he was locating those bucks. Where they're bedding on the edge of that cover, but they're working a lot more in those open drainages and stuff like that, trying to, I guess, stay cool. But maybe, again, how much do you think it's a factor of pressure? Like, even though there's no pressure in the summertime, other people walking around hiking and stuff like that, like, is pressure at all a factor of why they'd still be in that? Or do you think, again, it's just truly from, like Shane, you're talking about, like, that airflow can stay, I guess, more concentrated or they're not get blown out as easy?
Yeah, I don't think pressure during the summer, they it's like when it's gone to them. Like so. I don't feel like we can affect deer during the summer at all.
Oh, I think when you get in those drains too, I mean, you can be where it's cool, and I don't know. I feel like in the drains, especially at the head of those drains, the airflow is a lot better, and it's still cool because it's in lower elevation than the surrounding area.
And the head of those drains are typically thicker too,
Yeah.
kind of with that cover kind of encroaching into it.
Yeah.
So that's a good point. So, kind of not really recap, but just hit on this, like a couple points we've already made so far. It's like, Shane, you're looking for, again, these north-facing slopes or north-facing drainages that has the shade cover, has multiple canopy layers, the mature timber, sub-canopy, and something on the ground story as well. How much is water a factor at all? I mean, I know down where we're at, we have a lot of water, but like, is that ever something that you consider as well for potentially holding a mature buck?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, yeah. I mean, if I've got a large creek in an area, but in the drainages I've got smaller pools of water, and I'm going to worry about those way more than I am the creek itself, because I mean, it's always there, but those little tucked away places are where a big buck's going to want to get, even in the summertime. It's just that's just who they are. Is to not. I mean, I have put enough trail cameras out that even during the summer, the big bucks that I've gotten during the summertime, they may team up with a bachelor group, and they may act like the bachelor group, but they're never with the bachelor group. Once they will when they're in a feeding area, but when they're alone, they're in a totally different area than that younger bachelor group is. Like, it's like they all join up and they'll go to a feeding area, but when they leave that feeding area, that larger buck is still soloing himself from them, and they'll move on. I've caught a lot of bachelor groups in feed areas that have a huge buck with it, and then I'll try to backtrack them or forward track them, and that big buck is not with them anymore, 120 yards, 300 yards away from the feeding area. So then it's like trying to find that big buck, and he's usually somewhere that doesn't make sense for them. Like, they're wanting to stay in an area concentrated, close to food. They may move a lot more, but he's trying to get tucked up into something to stay cool, and he didn't have to move far for a little bit of food, and he's got water.
I think a lot of times they're near the water. Oh, and when we talked, it's not like they're using it as like they need the water source, like to drink. But you think, like when we went to Indiana, the deer were bedded right on the edge of the water. Wasn't it PK that mentioned a back wall, having a back wall?
Back wall, that's what we were saying.
Yeah, I think, and you can apply that to a lot of different scenarios, not just water.
Now, I'll be honest with you, though. I mean, up there, I saw that a lot, but like back on the other area that I came from, this really kind of Appalachian, I didn't see that a whole lot there. That's why that was such a shock for me.
Right.
There in that area, like the Appalachian area of the mountains, the creeks are more crossing the creek. They're not bedding up on it. So it's like, I think if you're hunting those two different places, you really have to be adaptive to how they're doing.
Well, I mean, it's just like
do both.
It's just like coming from where I set up all those trail cameras on that particular WMA, and then on another particular WMA that I hunt, they're using a lot more open cover than down there, from what I've seen.
Very true. That's why, to me, it's so tailored towards the habitat that maybe a listener or viewer is hunting, and how the strategy is going to change a little bit, because that's a really good point, Mike.
Yeah.
I mean, you could drive, like in Alabama, you could drive, 60, 80, 100 miles, and it is completely different worlds of like cover, vegetation type, terrain, topography, and how the deer necessarily uses them.
Yeah.
So
I would say in my one particular WMA, having a back wall, that's very beneficial to them there.
Yeah, I would say
I didn't necessarily notice it down there on that other one, but definitely it changes.
Just to also clarify that term, back wall, because it's been a long time since we talked about that, like with PK Doug White. But a back wall, for the listeners and viewers, Doug, who we had on, I don't remember his episode numbers, we can probably look up in a little bit, but he was talking about Florida, that water is a really good back wall. Just something that, or he talked about one situation down there. It was I don't know if it was like some kind of mine. It was something on the property that nothing could come from, and the deer would bed to their back up against it, and kind of work away from it. And he said the water works exactly the same way, especially like deep water. They're not going to cross without some kind of pressure. So that's what we mean by talking about back wall. But yeah, no, again, I haven't seen that in a lot of places in Alabama. It's one of those things I think, I associate more that back wall situation more so with some kind of deeper water sloughs and stuff like that. Like, yeah, the deer can definitely go across it, but he's really doing it so he doesn't have to worry about what's behind him. It's more so focusing on what's in front of him, on where he's going to exit out of that bedding area. But that is a really good point.
And it may be like that particular thing. It may be like where the creeks bed along them. It may be more of a Midwest thing. You think back to like THP, like years ago, when they were in that certain area and had come in by water. Like, I don't know if they kayaked in or if they walked in by water, but they ended up jumping that big, huge buck off his bed, and he went right down. Do you remember that one? He had all the trash in his hair, or
I remember in his hair.
in his hair,
In his rack.
all the trash in his rack. Yeah,
I remember that.
yeah. I mean, I think it happens a decent amount.
Well, in that MSU study, when Bronson was going over some of those, that particular buck where he was showing all the movements and the beds and everything, a bunch of those beds were stacked up right there. There's that bend in the creek. There was a bunch right there, but then in other areas on the creek as well, he kind of seemed to gravitate towards that creek. But then he talked about another buck that we didn't look at his specific points, but he's like, this buck, it's like you couldn't make him go across that river. It was like a wall to him.
Yeah,
and it's just
and I think that's similar to the Auburn GPS study that we looked over years ago. They'd use a ridge as like a natural zone, like, hey, this is my area and that is your area on the other side of that ridge. Mm-hmm. Like they'd go up and meet, but never would cross over, which was kind of unique.
Which you're referencing Auburn GPS data right there, which we got our hands on, and we put it on maps and we did videos on it and everything. Those videos are not on YouTube; they're on our Patreon account. But we were talking about that not long ago, where there was this one ridge where these two bucks they would come up to, and they would just, neither of them ever crossed over that ridge. They'd go to the top of the ridge. They were never there at the same time, but they'd go to the top of that ridge, but they would never get on the other one's side, which was kind of interesting. Mm-hmm. So I do want to ask about also food sources in the summer. And, I know that y'all have scouted, Indiana here recently, so I know it's different up there because obviously there's agriculture. But both of you guys come from more of a big woods hunting background. So in the summer months, what do you find important from a food standpoint in that setting? Or are you really paying attention to that, or is it just 100% cover?
It's food. I mean, food too. I mean, me and him were talking about it coming over here, and I think me and you did a podcast on it maybe last year, kind of touching on the same thing, and it's finding that isolated, almost like going to the candy store type food source. That's a good place to start out. If you can find, like, right now,
late
July, you're about to start seeing the pokeweed. And I think everybody knows what that looks like if you look raised in the South and you hunt. It's that purple-looking plant that grows really, really tall and, just looks like a tree, basically. But that's going to get really super popular right now, the next month and a half. So finding pockets of those in that thick cover, like maybe maybe you've had blowdown or something in some pine thickets or something like that, you can find that pokeweed. If you're a couple months or say a couple weeks ahead, the blackberries, things like that. If you can find blueberries, any kind of just unique food source, I'm going to focus on those as well. But certainly coming into the time of year we are right now, the pokeweed is going to be huge, and ragweed.
What about things like maybe some early dropping persimmons or muscadines? Or anything like that?
If you can find them, Yeah.
On this one particular place, like, I've had multiple cameras on persimmon trees, and I've never gotten a deer on them.
Really?
Yeah. I don't know why. Because in South Alabama, I've been to places and they'll hit them like white on rice. I mean, they're on them like white on rice. but not up
What,
there.
what about brown rice?
Possibly. I don't know.
Yeah, I've actually seen the same thing around here, where I've never had good luck on persimmons for cameras at least, because they're done by the time our bow season comes in. But we'll talk to specifically guys in Arkansas and even North Georgia. I've had some North Georgia guys talk about finding persimmon trees like up in the mountains and it being really good. But I'd like never have had good luck.
On my farm, I mean, it's covered in persimmon trees, and you can put a camera there, and there'll be a deer there every hour. But
so crazy.
the ones that are like I find out in the woods that are just alone, like in an old house place. Usually, a lot of times you'll find old house places. They'll have a couple persimmon trees there. Put a camera on them, useless. But it's just I think it depends on. I think persimmons are just like a crop. Like if they don't have good soil, like I think that has a lot to do with it. So if you got one sitting out in the middle of the woods, you're probably not going to taste as good as that one that's along the creek bank, got good rich soil to draw from.
Yeah.
Just it's got to be that. I can't think of any other reason. It's just the flavor is just not the same.
Yeah, we find them too all the time where those persimmons hold really late, and you'll find a persimmon tree in December that's loaded, and you can see them up there. I mean, because they stick out, they look like Christmas ornaments hanging off the tree. And I've never had any. I've actually tried to hunt those before, and I've never had any luck with them. And last year I kind of theorized that it's because I went up last year and I ate a persimmon off the tree, and the first bite was fine, and the second bite. I mean, have you ever bitten to a raw persimmon or unripe? It's rough.
Yeah.
It is rough. It tastes like carpet burn on the inside of your mouth.
It's like drinking an IPA.
Well, so like it's like drinking an IPA. Like half that persimmon, and these are even ones on the ground that have fallen. It's like half of it just doesn't ripen for some reason.
Yeah.
So I wonder if the deer don't like them for that because they get a bite of it and it's just half of it's bad.
I noticed the ones out. Like I found some too out here in the place we're hunting now, and the ground is covered with them. Mm-hmm. The squirrels are not even eating them.
Yeah.
So if the squirrels are not eating them,
One thing my dad
you're
always
not gonna have a
said,
deer eating
which
it,
I don't know if it's true or not, but he always said that after the first frost, that they become a lot more palatable because of change in the sugar content or something like that. Maybe they become more sweet.
Some of the best ones I ever had were up in Arkansas when I used to live there, and they would hold late, and we would get a frost like sometime in October, like early October, and you go and eat them, and it was unreal, like how good they were. But it's like I've never seen any hold that long down here.
Yeah.
So I mean, I think that's very regionally specific as well, and kind of like where it's located at and how long they're going to hold for. But not to get off the food tree or the feed tree food source aspect. Well, one other thing I think that would be super beneficial, and this kind of gets down to like episode we did with Alan Summerford and Kyle Lieberg when they came down to the farm, is like all your native browse species that like most people don't know of. Like there's so many different natural like native legumes, and that was something we found on our farm, my uncle's farm, in a lot of spots where it was just like, I mean, it was knee high, like 5 different species of legumes in like a 1 acre area that like he didn't have to plant, and the deer were wearing them out. And it's like that's one of those things that like I know what they look like now. I don't remember all the names of them. So it's like if you find like big patches where you have like that low growth greenery, and it's thigh high or shorter, you can literally walk through. And this is something that Paul Pater's talked about a bunch when he's been on the podcast. Like looking at those browse lines, like in the woods, and finding where like you can actually see the tops of all these plants being nipped off. And like one thing we learned a couple of years ago when you and me put a camera out on some mineral stumps and some clear cuts where they're growing back and the deer had them eaten down like a little beach ball.
Yeah.
I mean, that's something else. Like if you have some of those on a place where the clear cuts, they cut it last winter, it's growing up this year, and it's like, they'll be thigh high, and the deer will literally eat the whole top of that stump, and all the new little shoots come out. Like it's crazy.
Yep. Yeah, there was a lot of that, especially down there in that cutover. One thing that I would mention, which I've never been real good at the natural browse, especially during the summertime. Usually in late winter is when I'm really focusing on it. But like in October, November, wherever you're hunting at, what I like to do is find those first rubs, first scrapes that are popping up, and seeing where that sign is. And if it's in the feeding area, then more than likely, then that's going to be a feed feed tree, and might be something you could focus on in several different areas. Like as you go along, look for that first sign that pops up. That's what I usually like to do.
That's a pretty good, actually, that's a good segue right there, because I wanted to talk about that's the approach you guys take to finding deer maybe right now. But Shane, you were talking about how this year you're not really running cameras intensively right now like you have in the years past. You already have the cameras where you think the deer are going to shift to. So kind of the next thing I wanted to talk about is as you move into season, whether you have a September opener or maybe an early October opener, at some point the velvet comes off, the leaves start to change a little bit, and they change up their patterns, and like sometimes people lose the deer that they've been having on camera all summer. And like we mentioned that Josh Driver episode, which is on YouTube, episode 512, of being able to shift with those deer, so you're not having to just completely start over and relocate them. So how do you handle that? How do you handle that shift? What are you looking for to adjust with the deer?
Well, I think a lot of people, what I'm dealing with is mostly in really aggressive and hill country, like super, not really mountainous, but it's almost mountainous, So I think it's going to change if you're dealing with like just gently hills and more ag and stuff. The shift may be way more abrupt and may be much further. But in most aggressive hill countries, I'll call it, they're probably not shifting a whole lot, So there's this thought that, well, they were here 1 week and like the horns turn hard and they're completely gone, and they've gone to another county. They probably have just adjusted their movements have just shifted, not so much as in shifted a mile, more like a couple 100 yards, 200 yards, 300 yards. And so what I've done this year is kind of put my cameras ahead of time in areas that I started seeing these bucks in mid-September last year, and from that point forward. So I'm finding I'm locating, because it seems like immediately it's almost like you can predict about 2 weeks before those horns turn, they shed the velvet. About 2 weeks beforehand, they start looking for blowdowns, isolated patches of cover, moving up in terrain. Like instead of staying most of their time spent in the bottom and kind of moving up, they're already starting to move up in elevation a little bit, and they're starting to hit those places. So it's, if you got a beetle spot that's fell down and it's thick and nasty, I'm starting to put cameras around those. Blowdown areas, still in those north facing, because it's still going to be hot. So you're just shifting from trying to get them in the bottoms and maybe on those travel paths along that or along food, to moving up in elevation, getting up in those drainages, and finding maybe you got a blowdown on a secondary ridge point that joins a north facing drainage or something like that. That's places that I'm going to kind of pick on. The side hill, they start side hilling a lot more at that point in time and start doing those switchbacks up on those ridge points, getting more back into like a fall pattern. So it's just those isolated places that they're going to bed up in that early, and they're going to spend you got to think about where they're going to spend a lot of time in early October. That's going to be thick with cover and really, really close to a food source that's going to be kicking off in early October, which is going to be your white oaks, your oaks. So they're going to be getting closer to those places. So I think a lot of people wait to find them on the oaks, and they're in that transition period of moving from off of the summer food, finding cover close to the oaks, and kind of paying attention to what the oaks are doing at that point in time. So it's just that kind of transition point.
Well, it's like also a mature buck. If you're trying to say hunt a 4.5, 5.5, 6.5-year-old deer, by hunting season, he's lived long enough that he kind of knows where he likes to shift to if the conditions are right. So, and it's kind of like what you're saying, like you had a lot of these bucks on camera, and a lot of them, I'm guessing, made it that you're aware of.
Every one of mine did.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's like there's a very high likelihood, as long as conditions stay the same. Like it was kind of dry last summer. It was pretty dry this summer. We've had a lot of rain the last 10 days, though, down here, which is good. But the patterns hopefully are going to be the same. So, more than likely, again, we might have to do a little update on this conversation, in October.
Well, October's usually dry.
Yeah.
September's usually dry unless you have some sort of tropical thing. So more than likely October is going to be pretty dry, you know. So yeah, you're hitting right on it. If you can, unless you get some sort of dramatic weather change, they're going to be doing kind of the same thing, you know.
Well, and this kind of goes back to like what we're talking about, like shifting these cameras, and you're already going off the information you had last year, some annual patterns of bucks showing up at certain spots in September, you know, mid-September when they've gone hard horn, they shed their velvet, and they spend a lot of time in those areas. It's like they go from that summer pattern to this early fall pattern. They're going to be there for quite a while. That's going to be one of your best chances to kill them. Like you had some opportunities early last season on some bucks that were kind of on some of those patterns. So be able to think ahead of where they're going to move to based off the information you got, this past year and setting your cameras up for it. To me, I find that very fascinating, especially if someone's already done the homework. Now, the thing is, someone hasn't done this, where they either ran enough cameras or they move their cameras around in order to find where those bucks shift to. What is your, you've already said like some things to pay attention to, some of the isolated cover, but if I'm hunting an area with majority clear cuts and SMZs, the isolated covers, that's not necessarily a thing there. It's all cover.
It's all cover.
Is there any thought process for someone trying to implement that this year of what they need to do about shifting cameras and really trying to, whether cutting tracks or what would you tell them to do if they don't have that past experience about shifting those cameras and getting back on those deer?
And if they're in a completely like you said, a SMZ kind of cutover.
We can do
areas,
that one versus the big woods, but let's start with a cutover kind of habitat area.
I mean, they're going to. It seems like when they get into that hardhorn, they start cutting those corners. They start cutting the corners of the SMZs. They start cutting the corners of those cutovers, just like they're going to do once you get into the rut. Like they're still, their mindset is heading toward that. So I mean, our farm has had cutovers before, multiples SMZs in it, and tons of edges and stuff, and they start hammering those corners. Anywhere you can get a corner that cuts an SMZ, they're going to be in that. And habitat diversions, like if you're switching from that SMZ right into the cutover, they'll be floating along that edge somewhere, so I'm going to look at the edges of those hard edges in that type of area, SMZs, and especially if you get them where you do have the isolated white oaks, isolated food sources like that are in those, because that's what you see in the SMZs. A lot of times are those white oaks that are choked up in the bottom, and especially if they're in that super thick stuff. Now if that SMZ dumps out into open hardwood, they're probably going to be in that. But I'm going to look at that super thick head of that SMZ. If it's rocky or something like that's what I'm looking for.
One just came to mind. I got a spot that sets up exactly what you say. It's kind of like those head of those SMZs, those drainages. Again, stream side management zones. We've got, what was the episode?
Oh gosh!
Can you look it up real quick? What's the episode we did on the terminology? I've been recommending to everybody. Again, because we got a lot of terminology in this episode people may not be familiar with if they're new. But the head of those SMZs, when they've it's almost like they feather out into a clear cut. Mm-hmm. It's very rare you get to the head of an SMZ or a corner of a clear cut, and it's like hard timber next to like the pines next to the hardwoods. It's always like that corner's always kind of feathered edge. Which episode?
580. Episode 580.
Ultimate Guide to Whitetail Terminology, I think it's called. Episode 580. Go check it out. But it's like those corners are always kind of feathered. Like you always get there and it's like just brushy. Like for whatever reason, the pines don't grow very good in the corners when they try to plant them. So it's always like a feathered edge. The head of the drainages are always a feathered edge. And when I say feathered, it goes from like kind of open hardwoods to brush to like grasses into the clear cut over. It might be 10 yards, it might be 40 yards. It's like that or longer. And there's an SMZ I'm thinking of right now that is really close to where I shot one of my bucks, and it sets up exactly like that. And it's rocky, and it's just like all the brush is like chest high going all the way up into that clear cut, and then it's just a wall of thick pines.
Pablo last year, he was having trouble finding deer. Like he just messaged me several times. He's like, I can't. I don't know what the signs. I just don't know what I'm looking at. So I sent him into a place that had a pretty fresh cutover. I said, go up in these SMZs, and they're just like that. They're not super steep or anything like that, but it's open. I said, don't pay attention to the open hardwood. I said, but keep going till you get up in that thicker. I said, you'll see sign. I said, it'll start picking up when it starts getting thick and thick and thick. And sure enough, I said, go in there and look at all those SMZs and kind of trying to break down how you think they're using them. So he called me like the next day. He's like, oh, I cannot believe the amount of sign that I've seen in those. I've never paid attention to those before. I've just been hunting, the open like feed areas, And he said, I busted out 3 or 4 does. He went in there a couple of days later and hunted, and he's like, I approached it from the wrong way, blew out a bunch of deer, But I think it clicked a light on for him,
I got another one of these SMZs just like this. That remember that time I walked in Andrew to that spot? I blew it. I walked right through the bedding cover. This big loop.
Well, the spot I told you to go to?
Yeah. And
I pinned a spot for him, and he went out of his way to walk through the bedding area to get to the spot.
I walked through part of a clear cut. Clear cut, is real big and wide, and there's like 3 SMZs. And I went from one SMZ, crossed over through the cut, got into the next SMZ, and then worked it up. But that next SMZ up, it transitioned from, again, those open woods to it was this thick brush in there, and that's where all the big buck tracks. And that's what I was going to say. There wasn't any rubs. It was kind of early bow season. There wasn't any big rubs in that spot quite yet. Or maybe it was a gun hunt. I can't remember.
No, it was a gun hunt. Because you were trying to hunt the head of it.
That's
and
right.
Watch up into the cut.
But it was
hey, that area is probably prime.
It probably is
now.
primo. But it sets up like what you're talking about, where you didn't see any sign in the open hardwoods. And the second you hit, there was a transition between as you went up that drainage, the SMZ, where it went from open to a wall of cover, and you're navigating through it, and it's just big buck tracks over buck tracks crossing it, going back and forth, coming from one side of the cut to the next side of the cut. And like you said, that would be. I don't know if we've really ever covered that a whole bunch on the podcast, looking at the very tips of these SMZs. Where
I don't think so.
Yeah, where it gets really thick. And I think that's going to be a tip, probably listeners, if you go out there and implement it, probably have a lot of success.
And he's like, what are they doing in there? I was like, I said, that buck is just going at the head of that drainage and just bedding right there. I said, he's basically on an island where he can see in multiple directions and escape before. I mean, you'd have no clue he was there, You'd probably walk, first off, most people ain't going to walk up in there. So he's probably never been bumped there before. So, that's why he's using it. And he's just going up in there bedding. Soon as the thermals drop, sun goes down, he's back to his route, But he may stay up in there all afternoon,
It's just like that Auburn buck, the Auburn study buck. Do you remember it?
Yeah.
I think that's more one of the only times we've gone over it. Was the one where he was bedded up at the head of the draw. Yep. And actually, you were the one that pointed it out about him bedding in all those draws up next to the road.
Yeah, he bedded consistently, and there was one draw that he bedded in a lot, but he liked bedding in that kind of spot, and he had 9 different beds, quote unquote, that he was using, and it was always, he liked getting at the very, very tip of that SMZ, as soon as it peters out, and a lot of times that was right next to that road. And he would be within 40 yards of a road consistently bedding during the daytime. On a WMA, in an area we're familiar with, that gets hunted.
Well, this spot that I sent him to, I mean, literally the SMZ stopped. You had a gap of about 40 yards that was open where they had just cut it, went a tree on it, brush. There wasn't anything. It was wide open, and a driveway with 6 houses at the end of the driveway.
Crank off that 30-06 right there. Deer die on the driveway.
And that buck was just bedded right there, Now, I mean, again, we don't know. I had that buck going up in that drainage 11 times during the daylight in October, November time period. So, I mean, he had nowhere else to go. So he was definitely using that drainage to bed up in a lot. There's just no way to escape it, So.
Well, and we're kind of getting back on the trail camera topic. That's another really good spot where you could, if you have, and this is a conversation I want to get into, for the guy that has 5 cameras versus the guy that has 10, 15, 20 cameras or more, the strategy. But that's almost something you find an area that you really like. And especially if you're putting cameras out right now, maybe get your bachelor groups. And the second, if you're in that more kind of clear cut habitat we're talking about here with SMZs, pine thickets and stuff, once they disappear, instantly go to those closest spots, whether it's 100 yards away, 200 yards away, and drop cameras at the head of all those SMZs, those drainages. Because it seems like when you do get to those spots, it's a lot of that perpendicular travel crossing the tips of those things. And also, like you said, beds there, but it always seems like they're just working through that thicker cover.
Yeah, I mean, you get a lot of cross traffic of does just crossing that. So I mean, it's almost like a buck can cut a bunch of trails right there during any time, and he's gone like 300 yards maybe, if that.
Yeah.
Think about your early season Georgia buck.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, he was like that. He was in the tip of one of those. And I've killed bucks on the place where you ran all those cameras doing something very similar, and I've seen a lot of bucks doing it. And I almost think of it, especially when the top of the hill is more of like a pine thicket, and you got that SMZ that runs up in there. It's almost like there's like a highway up there that's running the edge of that pine thicket. And the tips of those SMZs are almost like exits, where he can, that's a good way to think about it.
Or an entrance, because when me and Clay went in and checked that camera,
Yeah.
he came into the top of it and worked his way down to where I was.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
Now I want to talk about a reverse SMZ, because I ran into those, and that was something that really keyed on me this year, like where I found a lot of bigger bucks in.
Reverse SMZ.
Everything's thick on top. It's been cut, blowed down. But the SMZ, and it's in the top of the SMZ will be the same way. Thick cut, you can't walk down through it. But right where that SMZ, right where that thickness kind of starts going down in elevation, there's an open patch, and then it's open hardwood below, or an open creek bottom or something like that.
Like that, by open you mean cut? Like
No,
they've
it's
cut?
open. Like it's pretty woods. I mean, I've showed you some of the trail camera pictures of bucks that I've gotten in areas like that.
So let's explain this again. It's like the thick cover comes.
Thick cover comes down, and it's just it's like an opening in the woods, and it's in the bottom of the SMZ. But I'm talking the thickness is like, it's not in all of these places. Like, they're not all built the same. But I've found maybe 6 or 8 in the location that we're hunting now that are like that, where the thick stuff
Comes all the way down
comes
to
all the way down, and you got like 25 yards of just open, almost like pretty woods, but it's a very narrow band, and those are just hammered.
I assume he's talking about the same exact place I shot the buck
Gotcha.
with Clay. You know how it kind of flattens out a little bit there at the tip down there?
Yeah, and that's where that scrape was.
Right.
What?
Gotcha.
And that's so. How do you see deer using those? Like,
I mean, I had them from late September, October. No, I didn't have many daylight bucks in October, but once you got into November and got near, like when the scrape started popping up, there was a lot of bucks in those open SMs, reverse SMZs.
now, why do you
daylight.
how do you use the term reverse SMZ in that?
Well,
situation?
because the thickness is not in the bottom; it's on the top down. So that's just, I just coined that right now. It's just the opposite of what we've been talking about, where it's thick in the drainage itself. The drainage itself is kind of open.
Okay.
But they've been they're rocky. The ones I found are kind of rocky, and like they still have thickness in them, but I mean they're literally ambush points. But they're, again, you're worried about thermals, and that's why the deer are using them, because that I think that thicker cover just pushes that they can stay up in that thick cover and monitor that open area, and those does naturally gravitate to that open area. Usually they got a couple of white oaks in them, but I had a bunch of bucks using those.
Well, I'll tell you something else. When you're talking about, maybe not with what you're talking about, a reverse SMZ, but like with a normal SMZ, when you get to the head of it, it gets that thicker cover. Typically, in a lot of places we go, that's where you're going to find one big white oak. It's right there, that where it's that feathered edge at the tip of that drainage, and it's just like it goes from like open cover to like thicker brush to like grass and stuff before it gets into the clear cut. There's typically always a big white oak right there, and it's one of those trees that, to me, those are like the spots that I feel like it's so hard to try to hunt one of those areas, because you're getting right in there amongst, like, you have bedding 270 degrees around you for the most part, and then you have travel like pass right there in front, like just trails and everything crossing right there. So it's a hard spot, I feel like, to get in clean to go and hunt. I feel like you have to have a very specific kind of conditions to be able to do it. But for, again, camera data,
Camera is perfect.
And this is something we need to talk about. Like when we're talking about cameras, and this can kind of get us segue into a different conversation, but like once you get into the season, you're very rarely hunting over a camera. is like the camera's inventory, but you're trying to figure out what's the best ambush point from that camera. So can we talk about that a little bit? Because I think a lot of people assume when like someone's running a bunch of cameras, they're putting their camera right on their tree, and there are some guys that do that, but they're hunting right above that camera. That's not necessarily what you're doing.
No, not at all. And that's why I'm talking about the reverse SMZ is almost an I mean, they'd be hard to hunt, but if you can find those areas, those are usually where you're going to be able to track a mature buck, or that's what I found in a lot of places, is those open areas in thick cover that's in some sort of aggressive terrain that you can't hunt. That's where I'm trying to, and so a lot of times I work harder to put my cameras out sometimes than I do to hunt, because I'm having to put them in some such god awful places, you know. So yeah, it's definitely, I'm not hunting over any of my cameras unless I'm putting one on a scrape and it's built up timed where the deer are not affected by that camera, and I'm hunting over that scrape for a specific purpose. That's really the only time I'm ever hunting around any of my cameras. And I'm rarely ever like hunting data that I'm chasing during the year. Like that drives me crazy.
Let me ask you about another SMZ setup, and Mike, I want to get your thought on this too. Have you ever been in an area where they've cut and you got this SMZ that runs up through a clear cut? And typically I would say this is very much like within a few years after they cut, but it's almost like, I don't know if they're not necessarily cutting across the SMZ. Like this SMZ might be 200 yards long, go up into a clear cut, 150 yards long, but there's some spot, whether they kill a tree or something happens, and like you have a big opening at some point in that cut where there's no timber, and it gets really brushy right there, and then the SMZ continues to go up. Have y'all ever like run cameras around that kind of stuff or hunted around that kind of stuff? Because my brother had a camera in one of those areas on a piece of public, had a buck on camera, and ended up hunting the other side of the clear cut and actually called that buck in, and he was able to kill him. He was in a different pine thicket, but it was the same deer. Have y'all ever seen or hunted in around spots like that?
Not hunted it in particular, but saw a lot of rubs in those kind of areas. I've never hunted one though.
What about running cameras or something like in a spot like that?
I've run cameras in areas like that and had good luck on that, but I've never attempted to hunt anything like that either.
Yeah, he ended up not hunting it there, but it's same situation like Mike, what you're saying. A couple years after they cut it, and it was like saplings grew up in that spot, so it went from like big timber to like a 40-yard gap where there was just saplings, and then it was big timber again, and it was all rubbed up. He put a camera on it and had buck in there locked down with a doe in that spot, just like hanging out in that little area. And it was one thing he realized with the camera was they were crossed. That's where they wanted to cross the SMZ at, was right there, because it was just thicker, and then it went back to being more open timber as it went up higher in the clear cut. So I found that pretty interesting. And again, it was one of those spots like he was like, man, I'm going to sit right there. I'm like, I don't think you can. Like, there's no way. Like, they are bedded. Like, you have to walk 100 yards into this clear cut up this SMZ. They are bedded all around you. Like, there's no way you're going to be in there clean. So he hunted the other side of it and was able to have success, though.
Yeah, I think people hunt a lot of places they need to hang a camera instead of hanging a camera. You know, like they try to hunt those places, and that's a place you need to hang a camera and not hunt, because, you know, I mean, you're doing the camera's there without you. It'll tell you what's there. You don't have to hunt those areas. You know, you're better off in those kind of situations just hanging a camera in there and kind of hunting the pattern off that camera instead of trying to hunt those areas, because I think you're going to screw up more than you're going to.
When it gets into an interesting conversation, which I had this written down, which was the whole, like, we just answered Q&A this past Thursday's episode about, you know, do you think you become a better deer hunter without using trail cameras, like when it comes to woodsmanship? I'd love to have that conversation with you guys specifically on how can you increase your woodsmanship by using trail cameras? Because some people, there's a negativity around trail cameras because people think it's lazy, throw a camera out like a cell camera, you wouldn't tell buck shows up.
It can become a crutch.
Yeah. So, like, how do you keep it from becoming a crutch, but you're also compounding and gaining more woodsmanship about how deer are using the land and not necessarily hunting over that camera?
Yeah, I think, what do you think?
I think, for me personally, I think you're better off doing one of two things. You can do like I did on the Southern WMA, and that's putting out those cameras and checking them like every 3 to 5 days and seeing if you're getting deer on there until you locate the deer. and then hunting. Not worrying about the cameras anymore. Or you can let them sit in an area for the whole season and then revisit after the season's over. But I think once you find out that those deer are in there, then you start doing the boots on the ground, and that's how you figure the deer out. That camera is only going to tell you what's happening right there. It's not going to tell you what's happening in that whole area. So unless you're in there hunting it and learning it and bumping deer and seeing what they're doing and when they're doing it, then all you're going to take away is what that camera saw, which is only that one little piece of information.
Yeah, and I don't think I don't think a camera can replace woodsmanship, and I don't think you can be a good camera placement without good woodsmanship. Like, they go hand in hand. Like, if I didn't have a decent amount of woodsmanship and had been in the woods so much, I wouldn't have a clue where to put cameras at. Like, I would be lost, At the same time, I can't use my cameras as a replacement for woodsmanship, for knowing what the woods are doing. Like you said, all the camera does is tell me what happened in that moment at that time. Now, I can use that information the next year, which is what I try to do, to put myself in that same situation. But again, even then, I've got to read the sign, and the sign has to tell me, okay, things are lining up. Like, the camera can only do so much for you. I think a lot of people want to use the camera to kill a buck instead of trying to kill the buck and letting the camera help them. If that makes sense. They're putting the cart before the horse.
That's a really good point. But I bring it up because I feel like I don't know how large that group of people is, but percentage wise, but I know there are some people out there that are like almost anti-trail camera, because I feel some people think that with trail cameras is more of a competition. Like, I've got this big buck on camera, I'm claiming that deer and I'm hunting that deer. And if someone comes in on me, then, we're going to have some disputes compared to just hunting sign. And you don't really know what it is until you show up, that deer walks out in front of you specifically. So, but the trail camera aspect, to me, I mentioned this last Thursday, is I feel like it's a way that you're able to confirm how good are you at reading sign and what you think is hot sign, and also confirming whether or not you think it's daylight activity or nighttime activity based on what you're finding. You're putting a camera on to confirm that.
I think people are too cautious these days. Plain and simple. Like, I think people are too afraid to mess up. And you're only going to learn by messing up. Go in there, blow the deer out. Use that for next time. You know where the deer are at. A lot of people go in for a morning hunt and leave and go get something to eat. If you know they're bedded down, go find them, go bump them, go jump them out of their bed, pin it, and then for next time. Like, people are just want to go in and be tiptoeing around an area real easy, not pushing in hard enough, not seeing a deer, and then thinking it's a bad area. But a lot of times, just like the other day when we was up there, that deer was 10 feet away from me. Just don't be too cautious. Don't rely on a camera to tell you what's going on. Go, turn over every leaf.
Go Dilla on them.
Go Dilla mode. If trail camera placement is going to be really tough if you can't read sign. Like, to be effective with it, like, you're going to have to be able to, you need to hone your skill for reading what the sign is telling you, and a trail camera only can confirm what you're seeing. A lot of people have asked me why I went so gung-ho into trail cameras, and I was really just trying to chase one deer to start out with. That was what it started out with, is just trying to figure out what one deer was doing, and that's really all I'm doing right now, is the same thing, except it's more than one deer. It's just, I figure if you use them the right way, then they're not a crutch. They're just letting you know, hey, that deer is there. That's really all I want to know. The deer is there. He's kind of in this area during this period of time. Now let me see if I can go dissect his sign enough to kill him. So it just gives you that little piece of information. If you use it different than that.
Yeah, if you're one of these guys, a weekend warrior, and half of the weekends you can't even go, a trail camera is a man day. If you look at it that way. Like, each day that it's out there is another man day. I mean, it's in the same location, but the more trail cameras you got, the more different areas you're technically hunting. I mean, if you're limited on time and you only have certain days, then yeah, I mean, use something like that to help you. I mean, but don't rely on it. I mean, if you have the time and you have, the chance to go scout. It's worth a lot more than a trail camera.
Yeah, just to explain the idea of man days too, for anyone who might be unfamiliar, is like if me and Pike go and hunt on Saturday, that's 2 man days. We hunted on Saturday, but it's 2 man days because there was 2 of us out there that spent a day hunting. If all 4 of us went hunting on Saturday, that's 4 man days. And I know that Georgia Outdoor News does this. Back when Alabama Outdoor News was still around, they did this, but they would do like man days per kill on WMAs. And you could go on there and you can look. It's like, oh, this WMA has 4.5 man days per deer that is like checked in on that place. And there's some other ones that are like 483 man days per kill, which we all know what that place is. And so that's what you mean by man days. And that's a good point. Like the trail camera acts as a man day. And Shane, also really like what you brought up earlier is you're putting these trail cameras, specifically the ones you're going to leave for a long time, in spots that you want information from, but that you're not necessarily going to go in there and bust into to hunt. And that kind of ties in with what Jacob was talking about with the SMZs, where this SMZ goes way up in this cut, and these deer are bedded all up in that cut in the thick cover. And if you go up in that SMZ, you're just running right up into the heart of the bedding, essentially, and you're going to blow everything out. So when you're putting your cameras in spots like that to gather data, how are you determining what is the safe spot to hunt, where you're close enough to kill him, but you're not so close that you're going to blow him out every time, that you basically just don't have a chance?
I mean, man, that's a fine line, because I mean, you can think you're in the right spot and you're not. That's so hard. It depends on the terrain. I'm always gonna be on the safe side, of that. I'm gonna, if I'm trying to hunt an area like that, I'm gonna figure that buck is gonna be in the thickest portion of it, and then I got to hunt kind of based accordingly, So I know if I go up all the way up in that SMZ, I'm probably not doing any good. So I'm just trying to get myself. It may take me 2 or 3 hunts in an area like that to get close, because I think you're just trying to pick. I know you're wanting to say. Go ahead.
No, keep going.
No, I mean, I'm just saying, I think that's one of those things where you have to kind of start at the basic, and then as you get more information in that SMZ or that kind of area, you're kind of building hunts off of. So you may stack a couple of hunts to really, a couple of observation hunts, see if you're in the game. If you're blowing deer out, probably just back out and find a different place. That's kind of the way I look at it.
Start cautious, work
your way in. If you start seeing it affecting the deer, maybe you need to get out. If you don't, just keep pushing your luck a little bit.
So one thing that I think is worth us mentioning, like a benefit of trail cameras, is I feel like not everybody, but some people are more selective if they're running trail cameras, kind of figuring out what is an average buck in an area, what is that upper echelon buck that they get on camera, and kind of maybe gives them more confidence to pass a deer because they know that, hey, I've got 3 bucks over 125 inches I really love to hunt. Like, I'm not going to kill this 85-inch 8-point just because they know what's out there. So that's like one benefit of the trail cameras.